Welcome to Rise and Shine, your daily business tech boost with me, Charly Leetham. If you're a small business owner looking to simplify technology and get real, actionable advice from someone with 35 years of IT experience, you're in the right place. Every episode, I'll dive into tools and systems like email, CRM, marketing and tracking, and I'll break them down into bite-sized tips you can use straight away. Your time is valuable, so let's get straight to the point. It's time to work smarter, not harder. Rise and Shine. It's your daily dose of business tech inspiration with me, Charly Leetham. Episode number 588, and I am continuing my series that I had started on how the internet works, I guess. I want to try and demystify some of the jargon. I want to try and actually remove some of the jargon from our conversations so that when someone uses the jargon, you've got a translation in your head, or you've got a translation that you can use and say, oh yeah, that makes sense now. Hopefully that works for you. There's a lot to get through, and today we're going to be talking about IP addresses. So what is an IP address? If you have been following along for the last couple of days, I have mentioned it a couple of times. I have explained it a little. Today we're going to get into a little bit more detail on it and how that works. So IP address, it's an internet protocol address. It's a unique number that identifies a device on a network. Think of it like a phone number for your computer or your website or your tablet or your phone, but it's not like a phone number. It's not like, you dial the 10 digits and you get a phone number. It's a number that is assigned to your device on the network. So when if you go back to yesterday's episode and the day before, when the DNS lookups go out, it says, yep, we know what that address is. It's kind of like your street address. So in the previous episodes, I've spoken about your domain name is like saying Charlie's Place. It's that label. It's that human-friendly label that we apply to something. The IP address is like the physical address. It's like saying 123 XYZ Street, somewhere town, somewhere city, in the world. Without it, the post office, or in this case the internet, doesn't know how to direct your traffic from your device, your requesting device, to the end point. It doesn't know how to get there. Your data are like letters, the internet is like the post office, and your IP address is like your street address. Okay, I hope that analogy lands. I really do. There are two types or two versions of IP addresses. Now, there used to only be one, and a few years ago they introduced the second. When we talk about IP addresses, you will see them written down, and you will see it'll say an IPv4 or IPv for version 6 IP address or address. The IPv4 are the old school. These have been around since the internet it started. It is a series of, so it is 4 numbers, 4 sets of 3 numbers put together. Sorry, I just had to get that right. I always trip over on that one. So yeah, 192.168.1.1. That's an IP address. So when you see that written, you can say, oh, that's an IP address. We know what that is. Well, that's an IPv4 address. Now, we say IP address generally because that's what we're really, really familiar with, and that's kind of like 80 to 85% of the addresses out there at the moment. Now, I'm going to say something here that's going to sort of have people go, Charly, there are only, and I'm underscoring that, 4.3 billion approximately 4.3 billion IPv4 addresses in the world. Now that doesn't sound that sounds like, wow, that's a lot of addresses. Well, it is, but when you consider that every device on the internet needs to have an IP address, all of them have been allocated. Every IP address in the world has been allocated. Every IPv4 address in the world has been allocated, which means that when we need to bring on a new device, assuming that nothing changes, there are no more IPv4 addresses to be used. Now, we will find that when we go to a server and we say when we go to a new provider and we say, what's our IP address? 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, let's use the 80-20 rule, 8 times out of 10, we will be given an IPv4 address. Why is that? It's because providers will recycle those addresses. So someone stops using their services, that address becomes free. The next person who requests the service gets the next IP gets the free IP address in the pool. So whilst we say they're all allocated, what we mean is they're allocated to the providers who actually divvy them out. So within the providers, there may still be some that haven't been allocated, but at a high level, if we look at it, if a new provider comes on and says, we want an allocation of IP addresses to give to our clients, there are no more IP version 4 addresses out there. Now, I'm going to say that again. There's only 4.3, approximately 4.3 billion addresses, IPv4 addresses out there. When that was realized, when the boffins who run the internet realized, or who administer the internet, realized that we were going to run out of IP version 4 addresses, they undertook a process and created the standard called IPv6 addresses. They're newer. Don't ask me when they came in. They came in several years ago. They've been around for a long time now. We just don't see them in use. We don't see them as often. So 80-20 rule, 80 to 85% of the IP addresses we get to play with IPv4, 15 to 20% are IPv6. Now, the IPv6 are newer, much longer addresses. So whereas IPv4 was four sets of 3 numbers, IPv4 is a much longer number, i.e. 2001 colon DB8 colon 1. Okay, you can see it's a completely different structure, and they've done that so that they can provide many more numbers. It's basically, it will provide a virtually unlimited unique address. So it doesn't matter how many people come on, there's normally going to be a number available. There's going to be able to say, yep, you've got this range. It's not going to matter. So touch wood, it shouldn't matter. So you've got IPv4 addresses, which are what we class as traditional, the ones that you're probably more used to seeing, 192.168.1.1. We've got IPv6 addresses. They're newer. 2001 DB8 colon 1, for example, is an IPv6 address. Longer, they provide it provides a much bigger number space for us to use. The question is that I had when I started to put this episode together to try and give it some clarity was, okay, so how do we know if we're going to use an IPv4 address, and how do we know if we're going to get an IPv6 address, and how do we know? What do we need to know here? You don't really need to know much. What you need to do is just trust that your provider is going to give you an IP address. That's the first thing. They have to, because it's not going to work without it. But for a little bit of clarity and just information, IPv6 only networks do exist. They are typically mobile carriers like T-Mobile in the US or Telstra here in Australia. They often provide IPv6 only access, and they rely on a conversion system, a translation system, to translate to route the IPv6 numbers into the internet and then convert them into IPv4 numbers. I don't really want to go into that. That is not a 101 type lesson. That's a 2 or 301 type lesson about how numbers and traffic gets routed like that. But what you need to understand is that, yes, there are places that only provide IPv6 access. When they do, they normally provide a way of translating that address into the main network so that, it just works for them. Typically with those types of networks too, we don't need to know what the IP address is. Like, how many of us really know what IP address our phone connects on when we connect to the internet? We don't. But if I was to say to you, can you tell me what IP address you're connecting to the internet on today? Some of you could go to your router and query your router and find that out. And in cases like for me, I actually have a service that you can go to ip.askcharlyleetham.com, and it will tell you what IP address you're connecting from. So we can find that out, but we don't know typically whether we're using IPv4 or IPv6. It doesn't matter to us. It's at a layer of communication that is transparent to us. We don't really care. Some of the other places where their IPv6 might be used in more so than IPv4 are in regions where they've run out of the allocations for IPv4. Africa, for example, under AFRINIC, that's their address regulation people. Now, that would be because when the internet started, they said, okay, so Europe's going to need X number of addresses, America's going to need, or the US, North America's going to need X number of addresses, Australia's going to need this. And they divvied up the number space according to those regions. And of course, in some regions, the internet was so new, it didn't even exist. They didn't get a large allocation. So once they've started growing up and saying, well, we need more addresses, we've got none, you're going to be an IPv6 only type region. Most of the internet, however, still runs on a dual stack. So a lot of the internet still has IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, and they convert as they need to. So that's the difference of what an IP address is. It is a number that identifies it's a unique number that identifies your device on the internet. It is like your street address that allows the internet as a whole to deliver your data to your computer. Okay, so now that I've explained what an IP address is, I want to go into what public and private IP addresses are. I haven't spoken about it in any great detail. I try to avoid the delineation between private and public IPs, but it is important to understand them. If only to when someone says to you, oh no, that's your private IP, I don't care about that, I want to know what your public IP is. Like I said, I don't speak about them often. You will have providers say, I need your IP address. And then when you give them your IP address, they say, no, I need your public IP address, not your private IP address. And that probably goes over your head because it's highly unlikely you realize that there are the two things. Private IP is the thing that is used within your local network. So when you create a home network, when you get a router or let's talk Australia to begin with. When you get an NBN router and you plug the NBN router in and you connect to the Wi-Fi connection or you connect to the physical Ethernet connection, that's the Australian version. If you're elsewhere in the world, when you get a modem from your ISP and you plug it in and you connect to the Wi-Fi or the physical Ethernet connection, you are creating a private internet. Sorry, I have got a slight cold. I'm very stuffy. No, not a private internet. You are creating a private network. You are creating a private local network. It is your home network. Any device on your network will be given an IP address on that network, and that's classed as a private network, and the IP addresses are private IP addresses. When you go out into the internet, the router says, okay, I'm taking all of these IP addresses that are communicating and I'm going to put them out this one port and I'm going to use one IP address. That is the public IP address. That is the IP address that your network presents to the world. What does that mean? That means that when I am sitting here and I'm talking out on the internet and I'm sending data out, the server that I am communicating with sees my public IP address and says, okay, yep, that's that public IP address. The people who live in the house with me are communicating out that same port and they go to another service and they say, oh yes, that's that IP address. We are all using that one IP address. That is it. That is the public IP address. So when someone says to you, oh, I need to know what your IP address is, don't go to your computer and look up your network settings and say, oh, the IP address for my computer is this. That's not the one we want. We want the one that's on the router. You can get that by querying your router, or as I said, there are services out there that will tell you what your IP address. Go to a search engine and say, "What's my IP address?" and it will give you a search. Or come to ip.askcharlyleetham.com and it will tell you what your IP address is. I'll come down to why that's important in a minute, but it's important to understand that you do have the two. You've got your private IP addresses and you've got your public IP addresses. The same goes, so this isn't just home-based networks, it's not just your business-based networks either. So if you're working in an office, it's the same thing. If you go to a shopping center and you connect, if you go to a shopping center or an airport or a cafe and you connect to their free Wi-Fi, you're connecting to their private network, and then their router is doing exactly the same thing and converting your IP addresses for your devices on that network to the one IP address that their network uses, their ISP uses. Alrighty, so that's the difference between a public and a private IP address. Why is this important? Why do you need to know the difference between your public and your private IP address? Okay, well, they affect your access. They affect your blocking and your allowing of access. So firewalls and servers can whitelist certain IP addresses. So whitelist means it's allowed. It will say, yep, we know that this IP address is a good IP address. We're going to let it come through. I'm going to cover dynamic IP addresses shortly because that's going to be that's another thing that trips us up. So when you're setting yourself up, you're saying, "Oh, look, I'm going to be connecting from this IP address." Someone can say, "Yep, we're just going to put that in our whitelist and say you can come through." You can also be blacklisted. So blacklisted is exactly as it sounds. You're not allowed. It's generally because you're coming from It's generally because it's a hacker's server. It's a spammer's email host. Something nefarious has happened. Unfortunately, what also happens is that if we try to connect multiple times to something and fail our password challenge, like we failed to log in, sometimes our IP address will be flagged and blacklisted as no, this is someone who is trying to brute force the system. So they're going to block us, but they block us at the IP address level. They don't block our machine. They block our IP, our public IP address. So what that means is that anyone on your network who tries to access that service is going to be blocked because it's only coming from the one IP address. We can also we can also be blocked because of our geolocation. Now, I spoke very, very briefly just now about the fact that IP addresses are broken up by region. It doesn't matter whether it's an IPv6 or it's an IPv4 address, they are still broken up by region, and businesses can block whole countries or regions based on their IP addresses. Now now that I've spoken about all of that, let's talk about the difference between dynamic IP address allocation and static IP address allocation. Those of you who have got who have looked at business plans for ISPs, business provision plans for ISPs, we'll note sometimes that they say, "Oh, we can give you a static IP address. It's $5 a month, or it's $10 a month, or whatever it is, $2 a month." Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's in the package because the package is slightly more expensive. What's the difference? What's the difference between a dynamic IP address and a static IP address? Remember what I said about the ISPs and the IP address providers will rotate those addresses through. They will allocate them to the next person that comes along and says, "I need," or the next application that comes along and says, "I need an IP address to access the internet." They'll allocate that out. When we connect through the internet, it's a little different now with things like NBN and always on connections. In the good old days when we had dial-up, when our modems would call in, so we would some of you won't be old enough to remember this, and some of you will just sit there and think you're just being silly now, but we used to have to log into our modem, tell our modem to dial the ISP's number. It would create a connection with the ISP, and the ISP would say, "Oh, yep, you're a customer. Yep, I've verified that you're a customer," and it would allocate us an IP address based on that session, that call in. So every time we called in, we would get a new number. We would get a new IP address. it would be rare that we'd get the same IP address every time, because what it would do is it'd say, well, I've got these IP addresses, next one up, yep, that's yours, you've got it. That's the same with these always on connections, with our NBN and our ADSL type connections now, and our broadband type connections now. When our modems come up, when our routers come up and connect to the ISP, it says, can I have an IP address, please? And they say, yes, here's an IP address. You will maintain that IP address for as long as that connection stays up. It doesn't change every hour. It doesn't change every minute. It changes when that connection goes down and comes back up. So if your router, I keep saying modem, it's a modem router. So yeah, if your router stays logged into the broadband network, it's unlikely that your IP address will change. If, however, your connection goes down, let's just say the ISP's node fails or has to reset and it resets, when it comes back up and connects back into your router, it's going to allocate you another IP address. It might be the same one, but it might not also. We don't know, and this is the trick, is we don't know what the IP address that we're going to get is if we're using dynamically assigned IP addresses. Every time our router connects into the ISP's network, into the broadband network, and makes a connection, and I'm talking about at that point where we can log in and say, oh yes, we have internet. At that point, we will be given an IP address. That's a dynamically assigned IP address. Now you can get static IP addresses. As I just intimated, it might cost you a couple of dollars a month, because what the ISP will do, what your provider will do, is say, yep, you want a static IP address, you want a permanent IP address. We're going to take this one address out of our very limited, in the scheme of things, our very limited pool of IP addresses, and we're going to allocate that to you. Every time your modem connects, every time your router connects, every time you connect to the internet from this particular point, you're going to get this IP address. That gives us a level of surety. That gives us a level of confidence. It also means that when we're doing things like filtering and whitelisting and blacklisting, we can say to someone, yep, we need to whitelist that IP address. This is a static IP address. Let's whitelist it. It's never, ever, ever going to get blocked. If you have a dynamic address, got to get those around the right way, you can't whitelist. Well, you can whitelist, but you can only whitelist for the time that you are using that IP address. The moment your router goes down, the moment that it has to reconnect to the internet, it's highly likely that that whitelist entry will become null and void. It's not going to matter because you've got a new IP address. So that's the difference between static and dynamic addresses. Do I recommend that you should take a static IP address if you can? Yes. If you can, if it's not too costly, if it makes business sense to do so, then yes, you should have a static IP address if you can afford it. It makes life so much easier all the way around. Just understand, though, that IP address is only associated with the physical device, so the router that you're using. If you leave your house and you're using your phone and your phone connects into the phone network and uses data, you're not going to be on the same IP address as you are at home. Just understand that that's the trade-off of it. It's not down to a physical device like our phone or our tablet and such. It's down to the router that we connect with. That said, I don't know whether any provider actually will give you a static IP address for your phone on the data network. I doubt it. I haven't seen it as an offer, and I haven't really looked into it. So maybe that's a question you guys can answer for me. Have you ever been offered a static IP address for your phone or your tablet when you've taken up a data plan with your phone provider? Okay, dokie. So I've spoken about what an IP address is. I've spoken about how it connects you into the internet, how it identifies you into the internet. I've given you hopefully what was a reasonable explanation of what an IPv4 address is and an IPv6 address is. why that's kind of important, but not so important to know. Like, it's just information to have. So when someone says, oh, that's an IPv6 address, you go, oh, sure, I understand what that means, and actually understand what it means, and not just nod sagely and think, no idea, that's just jargon to me. Okay, so we've spoken about that. Dynamic versus static, sorry, public versus private IP addresses. The difference between having the IP addresses on your internal network and the IP address that you present to the world. I guess I should also point out at that point is that when you're running a private network, it doesn't matter what IP addresses you use within that private network. There is actually a series of numbers that have been reserved for private networks, but you can be running the same IP addresses on my private network here that you're running on your private network in your home. If I was to ask you to go to your device and tell me what your IP address is, your physical IP address is for the device you're on today, and look at mine, there is a non-zero chance, in fact, a high probability we will be using exactly the same IP address. There is a even higher probability we will be using the same network address that for our wireless networks or for our local area networks. I've spoken about dynamic and static IP addresses and why you might want to consider a static IP address, and why when you try to whitelist your IP address, all of a sudden you get blocked again, or it's not working anymore because it changes because it's a dynamic address. How do you check your IP address? How do you find out what it is? When someone says to you, well, I need to know your IP address so I can look through the logs, or I can see if you've been blocked, or I can check to see if you've been blocked, or whatever it is. There are tools out there. You can go to a search engine and just type in what's my IP address. There's also services like whatsmyip.org that'll show you a public IP address, or you can go to ip.askcharlyleetham.com and it will tell you what your IP address is. It's not a pretty site. It's a functional site designed to help me help my clients better. There are also blacklist checkers. MX Toolbox Super Tool helps you check your IP address to see if it's on any email spam lists. And finally, you can also look at your firewall and server logs. That's a more advanced technique, but you can have a look and see where if you're having trouble, you can say to someone, here's my IP address, and they can go and look at their server, your firewall and your server, their firewall or their server logs, and have a look at what the IP addresses are. Have a look and see if your IP address is appearing in there as being blocked or not. I hope it makes it a little bit more clearer as to why IP addresses are so important, why the term gets thrown around like chocolate, like sweets. It's just an IP address. We need to know what your IP address is. The IP address is through, it's all jargon. I get it. But I hope that that's clarified it a little bit further for you. I hope it makes a little bit more sense as to why some things work and some things don't. Why when someone says, no, I didn't want that address, I want your public address, what that actually means to you. I'd love to know any challenges you've had, any problems you've had, any insights you have into this topic. If there's something I've said and you've disagreed with, if there's something I've said and it's raised a question that I haven't answered, I'd love to know that too. Come across to my community, askcharlyleetham.locals.com. You can join the conversation there. You can leave comments wherever you are watching or listening to this video. If this video was useful to you, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell to find out when I drop more content. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Bye. Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to Rise and Shine, your daily business tech boost. I hope today's episode gave you some actionable insights that will make your business tech work smarter for you. If you found value, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other small business owners who could use a daily boost. For more tips, tools and resources, visit www.askcharlyleetham.com. Until next time, keep rising, keep shining, and let's make tech simple together.